You've got daddy issues if you've clicked on this video, and if you're like me, you've shelled out a small fortune to have father step on you with her heels. And now you've got a new pyro mommy, or is it daddy, I don't really know. You're wondering, how do I even build Arlecchino? And that's where I come in. Hey guys, my name is TableFlip64, and this is the only Arlecchino guide you'll ever need. We're going to be going over her talents, builds, constellations, and team comps. Arlecchino is an on-field pyro polearm DPS, with her kit focusing on using Bond of Life to buff her normal attacks. I'm going to be going over Bond of Life really quickly considering it will come up a lot in this video. Bond of Life is the red effect that wraps around the HP bar, and it is a debuff that takes the place of healing and can only be removed by fully healing it off. However, in Arlecchino's case, it's actually best to think of it like a resource bar. Anyways, without further ado, let's do further and kick things off with her talents.
Transfixed!
Well, at first glance, her normal attack, Invitation to a Beheading, which is a 6-hit combo, seems like the standard fare. It's actually Arlecchino's bread and butter. You see, when her current Bond of Life is equivalent to 30% of her max HP or more, her normal attacks are transformed into Mask of the Red Death. In this state, she gains a Pyro Infusion and now consumes 7.5% of her Bond of Life per normal attack to deal greatly increased damage. Consuming Bond of Life in this way reduces the cooldown of her elemental skill. Also, it doesn't matter if you suck because whiffing your normal attacks won't consume Bond of Life. As for her optimal normal attack combos, the rule of thumb is to avoid using her N6. Outside of that, her combos are very flexible, so like N5 dash, N4 dash, or even N2 dash if you need to dash more often for survivability. There really isn't a combo using her charged attack because they don't get the damage buff, so it's a DPS loss to use them. However, they still get the Pyro Infusion, and also holding down the attack button after a charge attack will cause you to start gliding, which is pretty fucking badass. And super convenient for exploring the open world. Oh, and also her charge attacks can be used above water, so there's that. Next is her elemental skill. All is Ash. Arlecchino damages enemies in front of her and marks them with Blood Debt directives. She then randomly dashes to one of the marked enemies, also dealing damage. The Blood Debt directives last for 30 seconds and deal damage every 5 seconds up to 2 times. When Arlecchino uses her charged attack or burst, she consumes the Blood Debts and gains Bond of Life worth 65% of her max HP. The Bond of Life she can gain from this skill is 145% of her max HP. Arlecchino's first passive talent, Agony Alone May Be Repaid, allows her Blood Debt directives to level up to Blood Debt dues, causing them to now give 130% of Bond of Life when consumed. Additionally, when defeating a marked enemy, Arlecchino will also gain the Bond of Life. Do note that it doesn't have to be Arlecchino specifically. It can be any other party member as well, so even if you defeat them during your setup, Arlecchino will still be buffed when she hits the field. In general, you'll want to start the fight off with your elemental skill so you'll be able to swap back into Arlecchino after you've set up your buffs. The cooldown on this skill seems really long, but it's really not that bad when you factor in her normal attacks and her elemental burst. Speaking of which, Arlecchino's elemental burst, Bale Moon Rising, does damage in an AoE and resets her elemental skill. It also heals her based off of her current Bond of Life and her attack. Her burst is mostly just used as emergency healing, as the damage on it isn't really that insane and can just be used whenever or every other rotation like Hu Tao. Overall, this makes it so her ER requirements aren't that high, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. Her second passive talent, Strength Alone Can Defend, gives elemental and physical resistance based off of her attack. For every 100 attack over 1000, she gains 1% of these resistances, up to 20% total. You need about 3000 attack to get max value out of this. While this does help your survivability, it's not like you just want to go around tanking hits, especially because of her last passive. Arlecchino doesn't actually have a world or exploration passive, and instead has a third combat related one, which is the Bale Moon Alone May Know. This passive gives her a 40% pyro damage bonus in combat. However, it also makes it so that only your burst can heal you in combat, meaning not even other healers on your team can heal her. It's not as bad as it seems though, prevents allies from healing off your Bond of Life, so you will still be able to get your damage buff. It does limit her team options somewhat, but not to an extreme degree, and again, it's only in combat. Now really quickly, let's go over Arlecchino's talent priority. First, you're going to level up her normal attacks, and then her elemental skill and burst. The order on these two doesn't really matter. Now that you know how Arlecchino's kit works, let's talk about how she's built.
Overruled!
Arlecchino's best in slot set, to no one's surprise, is the new Harmonic Whimsy set. It gives her up to 54% damage bonus and is super easy for Arlecchino to keep active during her normal gameplay. However, not only is it the new set which takes a long time to farm, it's also not the most resin efficient domain to farm, so you'll be happy to know that her second best set is a 4-piece Glad. It buffs her main source of damage unconditionally, and it's pretty easy to farm. Not only are you likely to have good Glad pieces just laying around for free, you can also strongbox this set, and it's only about 5 to 10% worse than her best in slot set. After that, your next best bet would be a 2-piece of any of the following stats: attack percent, pyro damage bonus, normal and charged attack damage, and EM. The thing with EM is it's only viable on vape. Speaking of EM, sets like Gilded Dream are about on par with your 2-piece options, so it's not really worth farming it specifically for Arlecchino. There are also a number of other sets that I could talk about, but I'm not going to. They're all worse or more gimmicky. Now let's look at the best stats to build on Arlecchino. She's a standard on-field DPS, so they're fairly normal. For the Sands, you're going to want attack percent, and EM can also work as well if you're going vape. The Goblet, you're going to want to run pyro damage bonus, and for the Circlet, you want crit rate / crit damage, whichever one you need more of. The golden rule is a 1-to-2 ratio for crit. As for energy recharge, since I mentioned earlier you don't have to consistently burst, you can do it every rotation, every other rotation, or not at all. So anywhere in the range to 100 to 160 ER, just depends on what you want to do. So now that you know how you're going to spend eons toiling away grinding artifacts, let's take a look at her weapons. She's a polearm user, so there's a lot of solid options. Obviously her best in slot is her signature weapon, the Crimson Moon Semblance. It gives more Bond of Life, which is more uptime, and it gives a lot of damage bonus. And also when she's holding it, it looks like a scythe, which is really cool. Next up would be the Primordial Jade Wing Spear, which gives similar stats to her signature, and she can easily stack the passive. Plus, this is a weapon you can lose your 50-50 on the weapon banner, so it's more likely you already have it laying around. Staff of Scarlet Sands is a viable option, especially for vape teams, but not only that, it's also just a big crit stat stick. Arlecchino can also use all of its passives, though she can't fully stack it, and as always, the Staff of Homa is its usual stat stick self. As for 4 stars, Deathmatch as always is a really good option for crit and attack, and Ballad of the Fjord can be good in vape teams as well. As you probably noticed, the only 4 stars I mentioned were both the Battle Pass weapons. The reason why I didn't talk about any other 4 stars is a large amount of them are actually outshined by a really solid free-to-play and 3-star weapon, the White Tassel, which has crit rate similar to her signature weapon and almost 50% normal attack damage, which if you remember is Arlecchino's main source of damage. That being said, you need to run an attack buffer to make up for it having low base attack. Now let's take a look at her constellations.
Everlasting as the moon!
I'm not going to go super in detail about these, but I still want to mention them. Her C1 gives her more normal attack damage and resistance to interruption. Overall, it's about a 30% damage increase. Her C2 makes it feel smoother to use your burst for the reset. It also gives you more damage and more damage resistance. Overall, it's about a 15% damage increase. It still won't make you able to tank all the hits in the world. Her Constellation 3 is actually pretty good. It gives you normal attack levels, which, like I said earlier in the video, is her bread and butter. Her Constellation 4 just helps out with energy recharge. It's not particularly good until you have the C5 and C6. Her C5 increases the talent level of her Elemental Burst, which is only good when you have her C6. At C6, it increases her Elemental Burst damage by a large amount, and it also increases her normal attack damage by quite a bit, and this is a 50% damage increase. All of her constellations are good. They all total out to be over 100% damage increase. The best stopping points would be her C1, her C2, or her C6. That being said, she's really strong at C0, and I wouldn't spend money I don't have for damage increases you don't need. But hey, Chapter 7 bankruptcy isn't that bad, so that's your decision to make. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribing really helps me and the channel out, but also it helps you out as well. You see, when you subscribe, you get a 100% chance of pulling Arlecchino within your next 180 pulls. Don't ever say I didn't help you out. Last but not least, Arlecchino's team comps.
Laid bare.
There's not a whole lot to talk about when it comes to her teams. She has 3 main archetypes mainly: Vaporize, Mono Pyro, and Chevreuse Overload teams. That being said, in most teams you'll still want to run Bennett regardless of your other teammates. For Vape, you're going to want to go with classic character choices like Xingqiu or Yelan, as well as an Animo unit like Kazuha or Sucrose, or you're going to want to run a shielder like Zhongli or Toma. For example, Arlecchino, Bennett, Yelan, and Zhongli is probably my favorite team to run with her. That being said, Farina does not work that well with Arlecchino because Arlecchino can't be healed, meaning you'll be at low health and you won't be able to stack Fanfare that fast. Otherwise, for mono pyro, you're just going to be replacing your hydro unit with pyro units, most likely Xiangling. One thing you can do is run double pyro and double geo with characters like Yunjin, Albedo, or Zhongli. And the last thing I want to bring up is Chevrus. Chevrus makes Overload a viable option, where you can use characters like Fischl, Yaimiko, and Beidou, though you're still most likely going to want to run Bennett in there as well. But yeah, that's really about it for teams. All things said, I don't think Arlecchino is the most unique pyro DPS in the world, but I think she's really fun to play, and I think she really lives up to the hype. Anyways, adios, and try not to die.